In Ultimatum League, we are going to be given a choice. We can either take the easy road out, accomplish a small task, and take our pittance. Or we can push ourselves even further than we thought possible, reach for the stars, and reap the bountiful rewards that we know are owed to us. Now, if you're anything like me, you're most likely going to want to go for the second option. And to do that, we are going to need a powerful build, one that is able to handle everything in the game without breaking the budget. Between massive overhauls of the basic loot tables and reworks of almost every single league that you can think of, on top of the Atlas trees that were added to the game in 3.13, Ultimatum League has a ton to explore. So now that we know what we're up against, let's take a look at today's build. Now, as always, I'm going to be giving you 5 powerful league start options so that you can choose the one that looks like it's best suited for your needs. This time around, there are going to be a few classic builds that have been on this list before, however, there are also a few newcomers. My goal for these league start videos is to provide you every single bit of information that you need to have a successful league start. These videos will include complete leveling information, as well as full path of buildings with leveling trees, multiple gear sets, frequently asked questions and notes, as well as anything else that you might need. If you have any further questions that isn't answered in either of these places, you can either come and ask me live on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/bigducks, or you can come and join my Discord and ask for help from my community. Both of these are linked in the description. And the build that we're going to be talking about today is the Blade Blast Bladefall Inquisitor. Now, I know there's probably a ton of people, but Big Ducks, Blade Blast got nerfed, and that's perfectly fine. As I said, Blade Blast would absolutely survive the nerfs, and it has. If you go into Path of Building, you reduce the level of the gem a little bit, that's going to be the equivalent of the new gem, and you can see we still do tens of millions of DPS on this build. So while you may not kill bosses in under 1 second now, you'll probably kill them in under 1.5. Now, if you want to talk about builds that are absolutely ridiculous powerful and do insane amounts of damage, if you're just looking for something that will absolutely blast through everything that this game has to offer, look no further than this build. This build, with relatively budget gear, can do upwards of 20 to 30 million DPS extremely easily. And when you do decide to invest into this build, you can get into absolutely astronomical amounts of damage. I'm talking hundreds of millions of DPS. Now, I know a lot of people really dislike the 1-2 playstyle that this kind of build typically has, of cast Bladefall, cast Blade Blast, and watch the screen explode. Well, even though Explodey Chest is getting nerfed, between an Explodey Chest and the Herald of Ash that this build does use, you will still be able to very easily clear with no problems whatsoever. Not having to do the 1-2 playstyle, you'll still be able to just use Blade Blast. Will it still one-shot maps in Tier 16? Absolutely. In the other video that I posted of this build, we were clearing Tier 16 maps with a 1 Link and a level 1 Bladefall. This build is perfectly fine even after the nerfs. So now you may be asking yourself, well, I've seen this build as an assassin, I've seen this build as a chieftain. Why are we playing the Inquisitor? Well, in 3.13, the Inquisitor got some pretty massive changes that kind of went under the radar. Most people have been spending time talking about the recovery nodes, meaning the consecrated ground nodes as well as the hybrid recovery. However, I don't feel that this is the most powerful portion of this ascendancy. On the other side, we do have Battle Mage as well as Righteous Providence. Battle Mage allows us to gain added spell damage equal to the damage of our main hand weapon, and Righteous Providence gives us percentage increased critical strike chance per point of strength or intelligence, whichever is lower. It does also give us base 50 plus strength and intelligence. Between these two nodes, we are able to stack a absolutely astronomical amount of damage with very little gear. When I was league start testing this build, we were able to almost one-shot every single boss in the game with a single cast of Bladefall and a single cast of Blade Blast. And the reason that these nodes are so powerful is that because we gain added spell damage equal to our weapon's damage, we can use this weapon called Vulconus. Now, Vulconus might go up in price, but this weapon is farmable through Elder Guardians. That is the place that it drops. So although the price may go up, you can use alternate weapons. It doesn't need to be Vulconus, but Vulconus just is best in slot for this build. We've tested it, and even with mirror tier rare weapons, the damage is almost exactly the same. Vulconus is very simple to get unique. There should be a decent supply of them early on, and even if this build is insanely popular, you should still be able to get a hold of one within the first week or two. Talking about what this build is capable of and why you should play it, this build can do absolutely everything in the game. I've done anything from 100% Delirious Tier 16 fully juiced triple beyond maps to the Feared, and absolutely destroyed everything in the path of this build, all without spending more than just 5 to 10 exalts, and you don't even need that much to get most of the content in the game done. This build can start functioning on as little as 1 or less exalts, but once you do invest a few more exalts into it, it becomes significantly more powerful. Now, what are the type of players that are going to want to play this build? Well, this build can do absolutely everything, so if you're the kind of player who only plans on playing one build this league, this is absolutely absolutely the build that you should be choosing. It has insane damage, insane recovery, excellent clear, and all of that on a relatively low budget. It doesn't require 20, 30, 40, 50 exalts to get that super high tier damage, and this build is powerful from start to finish. It starts extremely strong, ends extremely strong, and is super, super powerful the whole way through. To give you an idea, we were able to clear tier 16 maps upon hitting maps for the first time in SSF gear. Now, if this build didn't do it for you and you're looking for something different, make sure to check the playlist that's up in the top right corner of the video now, and you may find something else that's more to your fancy. However, if you want an absolutely ridiculously powerful build that does tens of millions of damage on a very small budget, then look no further, and let's get into the guide. Hey guys, Big Ducks here, and welcome back to the channel. Now remember, if you're enjoying this style of content, make sure that you like this video so that YouTube knows to recommend you more of it. Also, over 75% of you are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel, so if you're enjoying my particular style of content, make sure that you subscribe so that these videos will show right up in your feed. You can always change your mind later. Now without further ado, let's get back into the build. Alright boys, so if you saw my other video, you know what I'm about to do. Now, for those of you who haven't, what we're going to be doing right now is we're going to be taking off our beautiful explodey chest, we're going to be taking the Blade Blast out, going to put this into Tabula. A 1 link. We're also using a level 1 Blade Fall. We're going to take off our Circle of Anguish. We're going to take off our Sinner Swallow Urn, and we're going to take off our Bottled Faith. And we're left with 3 flasks, a bunch of just whatever gear, just some rares. You know, Crown of the Inward Eye, it's like a 1C unique. Vulconus is expensive now because I unfortunately made it expensive with my build, but it shouldn't be too expensive on the next league start. And we're going to run a tier 16 map. I just took a random tier 16, hit it with an Alchemy Orb. We're on Awakener 8, as you can see, and we're going to run this with a 1 link. So, if you were curious about how powerful this build is, and you were wondering if it's league start viable, if you're wondering, you know, how much damage it can actually do, well, that's some porcupines. Hey, look at that. This is simulating what it's going to be like in a new league once porcupines no longer die from our explodey chest. Anyways, as you can see, the damage is working on a 1 link, and there's a blue pack, and there was a blue pack. So the idea is that this build does a absolutely ridiculous amount of damage. We are on a 1 link right now, and you're probably saying, well, Big Ducks, you're just doing damage with your Blade Fall. It's a level 1 Blade Fall, boys. So yeah, that's quite a bit of damage, huh? Like I said, tier 16 map, Awakener 8, half of our gear missing on a 1 link. Pretty good. So I just wanted to show you guys that real quick so that you know that I'm not lying when I say that this build is insanely powerful. And so now that we've gotten all that fun stuff out of the way, let's actually talk about the build. Now, this build is a Blade Fall, Blade Blast, Inquisitor. As I talked about previously, this build scales an insane amount of added damage to spells. Now, because Blade Fall and Blade Blast have such an interesting interaction, where when you pop down a Blade Fall, you'll notice there's easily 40 blades in the ground here, and then when you Blade Blast them, they all explode, overlapping and doing a ton of damage. Now, even with the nerfs that are coming in 3.14, this build does tens of millions of DPS. It losing like 20% of that is not going to affect the build at all. Trust me. You just saw me do a tier 16 map with a 1 link. Imagine what it can do with a 6 link. So the idea being is that this build scales a ridiculous amount of average damage through the Battle Mage node that we have here on Instruments of Virtue. It gains added spell damage equal to the damage of the main hand weapon. So the idea being here is that we use the item Vulconus. This is the centerpiece of the build. However, this isn't even required. You can do this with a Dietus. You can do this with just like a random weapon that has good stats on it, like good average damage on it. You can actually just use a random crafted 2-hand that you find on the ground, and that works as well. So the idea is you don't need this. It's insanely powerful, and you should get it, but you don't need it. So if you look at this weapon, you'll see that it says 140 to 282 and 155 to 225 physical and elemental damage. So with Battle Mage, we are just hard adding those numbers to our base damage, and then we scale all of that base damage beyond that. The other node that we have here is Righteous Providence, which gives us increased critical strike chance, and you'll notice that even without any kind of like lucky modifiers or anything, we're at 52.26 critical strike chance before power charges, before any of our gear, before Bottled Faith, before anything is happening. We are at halfway to 100% crit. And if you go and look in the actual path of building, with our curse on, with everything running, we are easily over 100% chance to crit. And that's almost exclusively due to this node. If we needed more actual crit, we could just get some more strength nodes, right? Like we could take some strength there, we could get some more strength on our gear, it would be very, very easy to get more crit. So that is the basis of how this build works. We take our damage from physical, convert it into fire, and that scales us basically to the moon because of how much added damage to spells we get with this combination of Battle Mage and Vulconus. Vulconus. So let's talk a little bit about abilities. Now, once again, I do use Steel Skin in a lot of my builds just because it's a very simple left click button. You can just put this on your left click and get a 2200 shield every once in a while. That's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The next ability is going to be Blade Blast. Now, the way that this ability works is that it causes a small circle on the ground to explode for damage. This ability by itself is not very impressive. However, when you do combine it with the ability Blade Fall, which drops a series of blades onto the ground, you'll see, as I showed you before, that it does explode many times. So the idea is that we are exploding close to 40 times here. So you can take the average damage of Blade Blast. Now, all 40 are not going to hit. It's closer to 15 or 20, but when our Blade Blast itself is hitting for close to 1,000,000 damage each time with all of our cooldowns going, we're getting ridiculous amounts of damage. You can cast 2 of these per second when you have everything going. That is a ton of blades exploding. So these 2 abilities are the 1-2 punch that everyone's been talking about for leagues and leagues and leagues and leagues, and these 2 abilities together are absolutely insane. They scale ridiculously well. Next ability is going to be Arcanist Brand. I use Arcanist Brand on pretty much every one of my builds. GGG said it wasn't just going to be a simple thing, well, oh, you put your curses in here. Well, that's what it turned out to be. Arcanist Brand, Wave of Conviction, Assassin's Mark, and Combustion. The classic combination of Curse, Wave of Conviction, and Combustion support. Wave of Conviction is getting a small nerf. It's going to be 15% of elemental resistance exposure instead of 25. That's not a huge deal, no problem whatsoever. And then beyond that, we do just use Flame Dash for movement skill. You can use normal dash, you can use whatever you like. I just prefer Flame Dash, it's easy. We do use Vol Righteous Fire. This is getting slightly nerfed, however, it's just another buff that causes us to do a little bit of extra damage. We do use Enduring Cry because this is just kind of like that, like, oh no, I need to heal myself really quickly button. I don't use a Life Flask, however, you can. I think Cinder Swallow Urn is just better, and I don't really need a Life Flask. Enduring Cry acts as my Life Flask. And then we also do use 4 auras. Now, there are 3 that are important, and Vitality is mainly only for a Watcher's Eye. I'll talk about that more later. We use Zealotry because what this does is it allows us to put Consecrated Ground underneath rare and unique enemies. You'll see that it says you and nearby non-minion allies have a 10% chance to create Consecrated Ground on hitting a rare or unique enemy lasting 8 seconds. And the way that this synergizes with the build is that you'll see that we have the node Sanctuary here, which gives us 15% increased damage taken, which is a more multiplier to enemies that are standing on Consecrated Ground. So that's a ton of damage. Beyond that, we do use Herald of Ash. This gives us an explodey effect as well as just some gained physical of extra fire damage. This is very powerful, and it lends itself to that explosion playstyle where you can simply clear with just Blade Blast. And then we do use Herald of Purity. It's just another Herald that we can use, scales our base Fizz damage, and gives us a couple minions that can tank for us. Now, as I said, you could level up Vitality if you wanted to. I just don't really have the mana, and it's not really necessary. The main reason that I'm using Vitality is because of this Watcher's Eye. 24 life gained for each enemy hit while affected by Vitality is an insane amount of recovery if we're hitting, think that we're hitting 40 plus times a second. So you're getting 40 times that per second, if not more than that, depending on how many enemies that you're hitting. So that's going to be pretty much it for the abilities. Now, speaking about the leveling, this build is insanely powerful for leveling. I leveled faster with this build in an SSF League start environment. I leveled faster on this build than probably any other build that I've played in quite some time. I'm pretty sure we got all the way through the campaign in about 4.5 hours, and that was with me talking with chat, and that was with me like getting distracted and like sitting around and looking at stuff and all that kind of thing. This build just does a ridiculous amount of damage. It's actually kind of insane. Now, early on, you will be leveling with Purifying Flame. You can do whatever you like here. I just found that for the Inquisitor, early on, Purifying Flame is pretty nice. We also do use the classic Flame Wall and Holy Flame Totem combo, where you press down the Flame Wall, you shoot the Holy Flame Totem through it, and then we can also use Purifying Flame. Now, Purifying Flame is not a projectile, so it's not going to get the bonus of going through Flame Wall, but I found that Purifying Flame was more than fine because of how this build actually scales damage. I use Purifying Flame all the way up to the point where I swapped over to Blade Blast and Blade Fall, which is at 28. You do get Blade Blast earlier, but Blade Fall requires level 28 to even begin, and you're going to need a little bit of dexterity to get it going. As soon as you can swap over to Blade Fall and Blade Blast, Blade Fall itself can clear everything absolutely on its own as soon as you get Battle Mage. Now, when it comes to leveling, the thing that I want to talk about is Battle Mage itself. This build goes into like Omega Overdrive the moment that you get this node right here. So what you're going to do is you're just going to go to whatever vendor you want. We can go to Act 3 because this is around the time that you're going to be getting that node. And you can go to a vendor, check out their weapons over here. We're going to see, we're looking for the slowest, highest Fizz base damage weapon that we can possibly find, a 2-hand. You don't care about DPS, you don't want attack speed, you just want the absolute slowest, highest Fizz damage you can possibly get. Now, normally this is going to be a mace because maces tend to be slower, so we'll see that this is 46 to 70 damage. I think that is about the best that we can get. There is this Vile Staff, but yeah, it looks like 46 to 70 is the best we can get here. So what you do is you would buy a weapon like this, and then what you're looking to do is you're looking to take the vendor recipe, which is a blacksmith's whetstone, as well as a random rustic sash. Now, I suggest that you use a yellow one, but you can use a white, yellow, or blue rustic sash. A yellow rustic sash is going to give you the highest percentage of percentage fizz here. So if you take a yellow rustic sash, you take a random weapon, and you take a blacksmith's whetstone, and you're going to get a weapon with percentage fizz on it. When you equip this weapon, you literally over double your damage as soon as you're able to start doing this. It is absolutely insane with Battle Mage. We were doing like, I think like 6k DPS in a solo self-found environment, league starting at like level 30. It's insane. It felt like I was leveling with Hollow Palm. I was doing so much damage. Actually ridiculous. So the idea is you just keep doing this whenever you feel like your damage isn't enough, which is pretty much never, but you just keep doing this recipe with the slowest, biggest fizz two-hand you can possibly find. And another thing to think about is that early on, you can spec into Avatar Fire if you would like, because it makes it so that cold and lightning damage are converted over to fire as well, but you don't have to do this. In the early leveling tree, which I'll go over later, we head down here to grab these conversion nodes. These plus Purifying Flame is enough to get our conversion, and then this node plus the Avatar of Fire is enough to get us 90% of the way there early on. That's plenty of conversion damage. So if you find just like a big giant two-hander with a bunch of elemental damage and a bunch of fizz, you can do a ridiculous amount of damage. I found like a generic, decent elemental damage weapon, crafted some fizz on it with the bench, and was able to do tier 16 maps the moment that I hit maps. I was like level 65 or something like that. It was just a random two-handed weapon. I was able to clear tier 16 maps. It's absolutely insane. Now, that is pretty much it for the leveling information. This build is insanely easy to level. All that you need to know is keep updating that weapon, keep making it better whenever you feel like you're running out. Keep track of your resists in your life. Make sure that you're crafting resistances on your gear. You get access to a bunch of these resist nodes early on. It's one transmutation orb. Just pick up blues and yellows and sell them to the vendor when they're unidentified, and you'll be able to have as many of these as you need. Craft resistances on all of your gear and keep that weapon updated, and you will be doing ridiculous amounts of damage. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the gear, but to do that, we're going to need to jump over into Path of Building. It's going to be much easier for me to go over everything with you over there, so let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, so now that we're over here in Path of Building, let's go over the gear. Now, you'll see that this is my gear that I had in game. This is going to be just very simple gear, besides the Bottled Faith, which actually got pretty cheap. You cut out the Bottled Faith and you cut out like this Watcher's Eye. The vast majority of this gear cost me under 1 Exalt. This was just like a 5C weapon that I bought sometime in the middle of the league. Vulconus at the time was a 1 Chaos Dagger. I paid like 5C for a good one. And then Crown of the Inward Eye is like 1C. This Explodey Chest, you do not need this. You absolutely do not need this. It is not required to make the build do insane amounts of damage. When it comes to actual damage done, this chest piece is only giving us the chance to gain Frenzy Charge on hit. There are other ways to gain Frenzy Charge on hit. That is the only actual damage source that this is actually giving us on, say, like single target on like a boss. So you do not need this chest piece. Then we just have a bunch of other stuff. We've got like some faster casting gloves, life resistance, strength. This Circle of Anguish isn't even the really good one. The really good one is fire damage and Herald of Ash buff effect, but we just got the Herald of Ash buff effect. And then a ring with some mana gained on hit that helped us with our mana on bosses, and then just a random life belt. Nothing special in any of this, like I said. I showed you can take off the Bottled Faith, you can take off the Cinder Swallower, and you can take off the ring, you can take off the chest piece, and use a 1 link and still clear tier 16 maps. Build is insanely strong. But that is pretty much it for the gear. So something I've noticed that a lot of people are saying that Vulconus is going to be insanely expensive early on. Well, you can see my damage here. This is not exactly correct, but this is the kind of damage that we're talking about, right? Realistically, this is closer to 40 or 50 million DPS. But if we go into the budget gear, you'll notice that it only went down by half. And this is using Diadus and Sharonabog's Pillar and a Wise Oak. That is without all of the good gear, right? This is just with like a random like life resistance chest piece. This is with the Wise Oak. Our good flasks are gone. We're using Diadus and we're using Sharonabog's Pillar. And our damage is still in the 20 million DPS range. As I said, this number is not actually correct. So with just very, very simple, easy to get gear, you can do some absolutely insane damage. Now, unfortunately, for some reason, and I'm really not sure what's going on here, every time I go to the expensive gear section, I get some kind of Path of Building error and it won't actually show the damage of the expensive section. I don't know what's happening here. Hopefully they can fix that at some point, and maybe it's going to be fixed by the time that you even see this video. I'm not really sure. So you can't actually see like the damage that it does. It just keeps whatever the damage previously was. You'll see I'll get the error here again. It just says 165. But there is way better gear in all of here. There's like a ton of better stuff in this section. We are getting some nerfs to a few like crafts and things like that. Essences are getting buffed. There's a ton of stuff that's changing, but most of that really doesn't matter. My gear section is still perfectly fine. Now that I've talked about the basics of the gear, let's actually talk about the jewels. Now, when we're talking about normal jewels, there's a couple interesting ones to take note of here. The first one being this Watcher's Eye. Now, this can be expensive sometimes. It really just depends on what the meta is looking like. A Vitality Watcher's Eye is a huge amount of recovery, especially for this build. You can run a level 1 Vitality and start getting 24 plus life gain back for each enemy hit by each of your abilities. You take into account that we're hitting with like 40 abilities per second, if not more. That's a lot of life gain. I mean, we're talking like 800 to 1,000 life gain every single second on top of all of our regeneration, on top of everything else. Ridiculous amount of healing. You can get other things that go with that as well. It doesn't just have to be this. If you're really Mr. Moneybags, you can get like a crazy Watcher's Eye that's got like Vitality among other things, but that's not really needed. Beyond that, we do use the Timeless Jewel Glorious Vanity in the name of Doriani. This did get nerfed a little bit in the patch. It's gone from 20% down to 15. Not a huge difference. This node is very, very powerful for this build. It gives us a bunch of extra energy shield, and we scale that energy shield up and we regen both energy shield and life at the same time. Extremely powerful. Intuitive Leap does allow us to slot in a couple of nodes here. You can use the other one. Is it called Unnatural Instinct or something like that? I'm not sure the name of it. I don't really remember, but maybe it's in the expensive jewels. Yes, Unnatural Instinct will give you the benefit of all the small nodes here. That's even more powerful if you want to do that one, but the Intuitive Leap is good enough. You don't have to worry too much about everything else. These 4 nodes are very powerful. It just gives us a bunch of damage here. And then beyond that, we just do have a few cluster jewels, and we are using some very simple jewels here. Now you can get much better jewels here. Crit multi-jewels do an insane amount for this build, but just getting some energy shield, life, and whatever jewels, just any kind of damage or resist you can get on are perfectly fine. But let's talk about these cluster jewels, because I know a lot of people get intimidated by cluster jewels, but these cluster jewels are relatively simple and very forgiving. The only thing out of the cluster jewels that's actually needed for this build that is important is the Seal Mender node. This makes it so that skills supported by Unleash have 30% increased seal gain frequency. That means that our Blade Fall, which is using Unleash, is going to be able to have full seals much quicker, allowing us to get that like double Blade Fall drop that has the 40 blades on it. This is very important. It's the only node that you really need from cluster jewels, so just make sure that you get this one. I paired it with Thaumaphage because this does give us some spell damage. Leech's energy shield is very powerful for this build. You'll notice that I also do have an anointment here that gives us more spell damage. Leech's energy shield. This keeps our energy shield topped off at all times because we do have ways to regen our life very easily. This just helps us keep our energy shield up as well. Now, beyond that, we do have 2 medium clusters here. One is a flask cluster. The main reason is for this spiked concoction, which is gain alchemist genius when you use a flask. This is 20% flask effectiveness. Very, very powerful. You don't need this, but it is pretty good and relatively cheap. I'm also using a Herald medium cluster here that just has Empowered Envoy and Endbringer. There are more powerful things that you can get here, like you can get a fire damage medium cluster. Those are insanely powerful. But there isn't really too much to talk about in the cluster jewels. It's really just the Seal Mender that's important. That is pretty much it. The skill tree is relatively straightforward. We can talk about the leveling skill tree because this skill tree does change a decent amount while you're leveling, and it's important that you do it in the right order. Because early on, what you'll notice is that we get a lot of different nodes and we respec these very quickly. So early on, we're going to be using Purifying Flame. We're just going to be coming out through these damage and mana nodes, this elemental damage, this spell damage. We're going to need dexterity early on, and attack and cast speed is always nice, as well as some movement speed. So I grab this, some life, some spell damage, as well as some elemental damage. We grab this life here, and then we head over first to Divine Judgment. Elemental damage is huge for this build, so we're going to move over to Divine Judgment first, and then we're going to head down towards Magmatic Strikes, as well as Unwavering Stance. Once you do get Magmatic Strikes, this gives you the other 40% conversion because of these 2 nodes here, putting us at 90% conversion for Purifying Flame, and then later on when we swap to BFBB, you can either use Fizz the Lightning, or you can use Avatar of Fire to convert the rest of your damage over. We do grab Unwavering Stance here just because it'll prevent us from getting stunned while we're casting so many abilities. And you're going to need a lot of dexterity, so make sure that you take it. Our first Ascendancy node, as I said before, is always going to be Instruments of Virtue. This is insanely strong, and I do recommend that you go with it first. This is definitely the one that you want to go for. You want to get that big fizz weapon, and you want to slam into every single enemy in the game and annihilate them instantly. It's actually insane. The next skill tree is going to be filling out these nodes here. This is around when we're swapping into Bladefall, Blade Blast. These nodes, although you do see where it says lightning spells have 25% physical damage conversion and fire spells have 25% of physical damage conversion, these don't actually work for Bladefall, Blade Blast. They're physical spells, not lightning and fire spells. However, these nodes do give us 24% increased damage and gain 5% of physical damage as extra fire. These two nodes are insanely powerful for this build. It's 24% and 5 gained in each one of these nodes. Very, very, very strong. Then beyond that, we do start heading up over here towards Avatar of Fire, as I said before. This gives us the other half of our conversion, and we do also head over towards Elemental Overload. Now, Elemental Overload is very powerful, and a lot of people say that you should go for it first. However, with this build, it is more important that we get our damage conversion first, and then we can head over to Elemental Overload later. We also do head over here, start grabbing some life, and we grab Avatar of Fire like I said before. The next node that we're going to be getting on the tree is going to be Sanctuary. This is going to make it so that we have Consecrated Ground while we're not moving. It's going to make it so that we regenerate a little bit while we're fighting bosses, and if you do manage to get Consecrated Ground going early with like Zealotry or something like that, you get the 15% more damage. Now at this point, we're getting close to finishing up the campaign. We're going to be moving over towards the right side of the tree now. You'll see that we're mainly just going through Dexterity, Life, Dexterity. We're grabbing this Life and Energy Shield, and we're grabbing this Life and Energy Shield. There's not much else that's going on right now. We are going to be going Pious Path next. This is going to allow us to have permanent Consecrated Ground effect on us, and this does give us permanent immunity to ailments and the hybrid recovery that I talked about before. As long as you're moving and casting, you will always have Consecrated Ground on you at all times. So we start getting this hybrid scaling, we start having all of the Energy Shield and Life at the same time. That's where we get a lot of our health from. Moving on to the skill point quest, you'll see that we just fill in a few things here. We're mainly grabbing life and resistances. We're grabbing some cast speed because this does help with blade fall, putting in some life, grabbing these nodes earlier, pathing over to here. We are moving down towards this elemental damage, crit, and life here. And then when we are moving into our level 90 tree, once we're starting to get into maps, you'll see that we have swapped a few things around. This is the point where we are swapping over to cluster jewels. This is where we're swapping to crit. When we do swap to crit, we are going to start taking these crit nodes here. We'll fill out these crit nodes here. We're going to drop elemental overload because we're going to be worrying about crit multi now. You'll see that we've dropped all these nodes down here because once we do have Vulconus, Vulconus does give us 50% of physical damage converted to fire while you have Avatar of Fire. So this stacks with Avatar of Fire itself. So we get the full 50 plus 50, 100% conversion of physical into fire damage now. So we don't need these nodes down here anymore. And we'll just fill out these nodes here. We'll take all of these out and start moving them into cluster jewels, as well as this crit, and this crit. Now, if you can't get Intuitive Leap early on, I do suggest that you grab these mana nodes. These mana nodes are very powerful, but I would look for getting an Intuitive Leap when you can. This node, the Herald Reservation node, is very powerful. We use 2 Heralds, so this allows us to have both of those going at the same time. And then, as I said, we move into these cluster jewels. I talked about that a little bit earlier in the video. And then, after all of that, the final node that we're going to be getting is Righteous Providence, because this is around when you're going to get your Uber Lab and you're going to be converting into full crit damage. And the level 100 tree just finishes out a couple little skill points here and there. There's nothing really too special. You'll see that we're grabbing a little bit more crit here, and as well as this fire damage here. Nothing too crazy, nothing too special. Gain a little bit of AoE here, nothing else really to talk about. And that's most of what we're doing on the skill tree. Now, as I said before, you can use this expensive jewel skill tree and grab a couple extra points because the Unnatural Instinct is very expensive. It's going to give you all of these nodes around here, which is extremely powerful, but we don't really need to do that. The final tree here is more than fine. So I do want to go over a little bit about the information that is available in this passive building so that you know all the stuff that you can look for as you're leveling up. So we do have full skills here. There are leveling skills that you can see. They've got all of the links. You should use them in order if you can. So if you only have access to 3 links, basically the way that you would do is you go down here and be like, all right, I've got Purifying Flame. Can I use Elemental Focus? No. Can I use Controlled Destruction? No. Then you would use Added Fire Damage. Can I use Concentrated Effect? Yes, and then you start adding those in order. These should be the ones that you're using. We've got Holy Flame Totem, Flame Wall. You'll see the conversion into Blade Blast here. Intensify is very important for the build. Intensify does cause us to do a little bit more AoE. It causes the AoE to be a little bit larger, and we've got all of our damage here. Note that you can do Elemental Focus. We're not worried about igniting. Our Blade Fall can ignite if you're worried about whether or not Vulconus is going to give us our fire damage. And then we do have our in-game skill trees here. If you're looking for like the super high-end version, you can get Anomalous, Intensify, and all this kind of Awakened Gems and all that kind of cool stuff. And then we have all of our additional abilities here. There are multiple gear sets. There's a budget gear set, an expensive gear set, and then the gear that you saw in the video. There is a set of configurations here. Make sure that you do change this depending on anything that you change with the build. Like if you stop using Wave of Conviction, you would turn that off. If you don't have Frenzy charges available, you would turn Frenzy charges off. If you don't have any of that, You have to move these points around just depending on what's going on. And then last but not least, we do have the notes here. There is a ton of work that I've put into these notes. Make sure that you check this out. It is very, very, very likely that the question that you have to ask is going to be in these notes, so check out this first. And that is pretty much going to be it for the path of building. And that is going to be it, boys. This build is insanely powerful, but if you do have any questions that aren't answered in the video or in the path of building, you can always go check out my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/bigducks. That's going to be one of the best ways to get your question answered if I'm live. Make sure that you come and throw me a follow. If I'm not live or I wasn't able to answer your question, check out my Discord. Both of those are linked down in the description. There is a ton of helpful community members over on my Discord channel. Make sure that you come and hang out with the community. I'd appreciate having you there. So this build is easily one of the most powerful builds that I've ever played. If you're just looking for that one and done, huge, mega powerful League build that you're just going to be able to do absolutely all the content in the game, this is probably the one that you're looking for. So remember, guys, if you enjoy this content, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in raid class. And I'll see you guys in 3.14 Ultimatum League.